I have one for you.
Hmm.
According to the 1932 Supreme Court ruling in Green versus Department of Rain Management, freedom of umbrella use is protected under the Fourth Amendment. Sounds plausible, formatted like a real citation, entirely made up. Totally made up.
You must be kidding me.
No, 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 and this happens quite a bit. I was even playing with it yesterday, and it was making things up while I was playing with it, trying to get it to do something with a recent law. So the problem we run into is that AI doesn't lie; it predicts, and it predicts at scale, and it ultimately makes things up because it's trying to sound smart. It's trying to please you, right?
And that was really believable because you had all the names and the numbers lined up
Right,
very believably.
right. So, it's like that confident kid in class who raises their hand all the time and they know they have the answer, but in the end, it's kind of like, nice try, right?
Well,
So,
that's really
what,
something. Yeah.
right? So, the big question then is, what happens when this kind of confident nonsense shows up in a research paper or a scientific journal or an institutional policy? That's what we're diving into today with AI hallucinations and how librarians actually might be our last line of defense.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, guess what I've made?
What'd you make? Wow, that is really cool. I guess that's why you make the big bucks in doing this podcast. But let me just point out that I also did something not as cool as what you've done because I really do think that's cool. I found us a sponsor for this week's episode.
Oh, oh, oh. That's perfect. I
So
mean, if you know, you know, right?
that's right. If you know, you know. So you want to start with the big ideas, and then
Absolutely.
we'll get ready to have our guest.
Absolutely. So, welcome to episode 4, everybody. I hope you like that intro video. If you did not, please comment and let me know you did not. But if you did,
I
hey,
like it.
send some love. Okay.
That's
So,
right.
episode 4, Sean, we made it to episode 4. Can you believe it?
I can't.
I
It's
cannot.
crazy.
And if you're keeping track, we've moved to a new platform today.
Yay!
So
Production
yes, we
value continues to go
can.
up.
Yes, absolutely. So in this show, or like in today's episode, we're going to explore like the intersection of technology, society, and future knowledge. Right. So today, the
Hmm.
topics that we're going to tackle are AI hallucinations.
Hmm.
Now, these just aren't like random glitches anymore, right? This is
Nope.
when the machine gets it wrong, right? And it's almost central to how large language models are working at this point. Like everybody or like every model hallucinates at this point, right?
Hmm. They do.
And
They do.
so talking about like understanding what the author and the engineer Mahmoud Ozer helps us to kind of reframe this conversation a little bit, right? So he's using the word
Mhm.
confabulation. Is that correct, Sean?
That is. It's the correct term. It comes out of psychiatry and psychology, and it is something that humans do too. And we could talk
Right.
about that if you want, but that may be better.
Right. So yeah, we will get into how humans kind of confabulate as well.
Right.
Um, but this confabulation is showing up everywhere at this point, right? It's in papers, classrooms,
Hmm.
policy drafts, tools. Like you were saying, like it's almost everywhere, and it's so it looks so real that it almost feels trustworthy, right?
Right.
And that's where I feel like the core of data or the core of knowledge, like the people who are there taking care of the core of data or core of knowledge are the librarians, and they need to start
Hmm.
stepping in and having their say, and somebody needs to listen to what their perspective is as well. Yeah,
I
I
agree.
agree.
Well, I agree. They're trained on this, and
Absolutely.
we use the general term hallucination, and that's fine if we stick with that because that is more colloquial. But confabulation is really more about constructing a plausible falsehood around existing knowledge. That's why it's a
Right.
better sort of model for the LLM. And what librarians have always done, uh, is they've always been sort of the front line on dealing with some of that, right? So they set up, they even have protocols on how to separate out what is false from what is true, what's a valid source from a non-valid source, et cetera. So I agree. They're essentially the guides for AI literacy, or they are one of the crucial ones, as well as ethical sourcing and critical engagement.
Right. And yep, absolutely. I agree to that, which leads us to our first guest for his podcast. I feel like a show host almost. I need a sidekick and a band after this.
That's right. Hey, that may happen the way production's going on. So.
Here's to A1.
That's right.
All right. So I'd let you take it away, Sean. Go ahead, introduce Angela, and then, she'll be here and we'll have some wonderful conversations.
Okay. So full disclosure, Angela and I are married, but Angela has a life completely separate from me, and particularly in the professional sense, and that is that she's been the technical service librarian at the library, Ross Pendergraph Library, since 2012. She handles the catalog acquisitions behind the scenes, but she acts as a liaison for English, behavioral sciences, and business, and she provides information literacy instruction and research assistance when ultimately they need somebody to do that. So she's kind of integral to the literacy and research side of the library as well. Right now, she's serving as the chair of the College and University Librarians of Arkansas, and it's a subcommittee of the Arkansas Library Association. She does tech talks on artificial intelligence and academic research. She moderates panel discussions on artificial intelligence. And she did so at the last Arkansas Library Association conference. And she's planning an AI summit for academic librarians in the state this fall. Cool. So she's kind of a crucial source, and oftentimes that's our dinner table conversation when we have nothing else. Is we go directly to the A1. We reach for the A1 because it's special sauce for everything. It goes great with everything. A1. I hope you're listening.
All right, so let's have her in, and we will start our conversation.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Hey.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
I hear any
Can
of
you hear us?
A second.
Uh-oh.
I gotta turn my speakers up. Okay, my speakers are up. Can you hear
Can you
me?
hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Ghosh, I can hear you too.
All right, perfect. Call me Bhaskar.
Bhaskar, gotcha.
All right, so how's it going?
It's going good. How is my voice levels? Is this an appropriate microphone, or do you want me to switch to headphones and see if that sounds better?
No, I think it sounds good, don't you?
I think you're fine, yeah.
Okay. Is my background, should I unblur my background? I'm wondering if I should.
Nah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It looks a little weird. I don't know. Let me see. Oh wait, no, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Way to do that?
So maybe if you can click on your picture on your video.
Yeah.
And there should be a one.
While recording, visual effects cannot be changed.
All right, well, let's just stick with this.
Okay, that's
Yep.
fine. Just my hair is starting to kind of blend into the background, and now it looks strange. But that's okay. It's fine.
I'm bald, that's why I wear the hat. So
Fine.
All right, before we ask you the questions, what do you think of the intro of the opening video?
Oh,
Did you watch it?
The circle thing and the music?
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's very
All right,
neat.
cool.
I love it. Although you're gonna have to grow
Thank you. That's what we like to wear.
You have to grow your beard out a little bit more.
Yeah,
that's right.
maybe.
I might have to trim mine. It's getting to be
Yeah. It does. I will say the image itself makes it look like this is a podcast about brewing beer. So I'm just throwing that out
We
there.
can do
Hey,
that too.
maybe it is.
Yeah,
Maybe
we
it
can
is.
do that too.
It all gets back there, right?
Yeah. All right, awesome. So thank you so much, Angela, for being here. You are our first guest, so we're honored to have you. It's not like we've done this before, so excuse
It's all right.
the stupidity, maybe.
All right.
All right, so let's get into segment one for our podcast. And the first segment, we want to talk about where did AI learn that, right? The ethics beneath the code. And like we've seen that the foundation of most LLMs is just includes unlicensed data and like web scrape data, which a lot of people might not subscribe to begin with, right? So there are major tech companies like Meta and OpenAI that have used pirated data sets as well to train their models, and copyrighted books, academic journals, like you name it, it's just out there, right?
Right.
So the quote goes that generative AI chatbots often don't cite sources; they just cite imaginary ones. So, this almost decontextualizes knowledge. So, where are you? Like, what do you think, or how would you talk about citation ethics when it comes to students who are using all of these things that are trained unethically, almost?
That's a great question. It does come up, and when we talk to students, the frequent question I hear is, "Can I cite AI generated content?" I'm like, well, technically, yes. There are citation manuals that tell you how to cite it and what are the steps to doing that. But then my next question is, why would you want to use that as a source, right? Do you trust that source? And let's talk about what trust means and the ethics behind the answers that you're generating. So I think for the most part, students may not necessarily care too much about the complications and the legal nuances behind all of this. I mean, for our part, we want to demonstrate and model good ethical research behavior. And so it's kind of our job, and really every faculty member's job, to sort of model that and talk about that information has value, right? And that we have to respect, the kind of ethics that go behind the information process and the research process. And why does it matter that there's copyright? Why does it matter that these sources are protected? And because companies didn't want to pay to use this as a training model, so
Not surprised.
they just went around it, and they seem to not be caring so much about any legal ramifications because they're betting on the fact that their technology will increase faster than the law is being written to control it. And I think you're seeing
Right.
that kind of happen. So in the conversation with students, I think it's important to be open about that and to talk about that landscape that they're entering into, which is not going to necessarily be unfamiliar territory. I mean, many parts of our society and the things that we enjoy in our modern industrial life were built on unethical practices all along, right? The clothes that you wear, the car that you drive that's polluting the environment. We can talk about just being aware is a good first step in that process to understand the informational landscape that ChatGPT and all of these other large language models are drawing on. And if you can understand that well, then that sort of helps to understand the output that they're getting and why they should be treating that with a little bit more critical thinking than just accepting verbatim everything that is spitting out. And that's step one, is just getting them to care about it, right? Getting them to understand that you cannot take this at face value.
Right. And that's a valid point. And that kind of got me thinking that for students this is almost like a cheat code, right? And if students have video gamed for a very long time, cheat codes are a big thing. Like that's almost like God mode for a video game, right? And you can just do whatever you want. You can get away with whatever you want. And I wonder if there's that level of dopamine in there where they're like, it doesn't matter what assignment you're going to give me, I can find it somewhere with ChatGPT, or I can use some kind of ChatGPT to find it for me. So I'm going to get away with this, like it or not.
Yeah.
And again, agreed,
Well-
not everybody's like that, but
Right.
But,
Well, I was going to jump in and just
Yeah.
point something out, and just to give everybody context on the listening side. The sites they scrape mostly are things like LibGen and Anna's Archive, and you're talking about something like 7.5 million books and 81 million research papers at the time that Meta went in particular, and this is according to the unsealed documents. And so librarians are, in some respect, being asked to recommend or support tools whose origins may violate the very ethical frameworks libraries exist to protect, right? So this is the ethical paradox. And so last episode when we talked about transparency, I talked about it from one side, but transparency is actually a far more complex issue because the use of AI is technically, to some degree, going to be unethical, like we're saying, right?
Well,
So
you talked about transparency, and that's part of the problem is that these companies are not very transparent in the data sources that they're using, nor are they very transparent about how the answers are generated. Why are
right.
we seeing? So there's a problem of, reproducibility, and how interpretability, right? How do we understand what they're generating? And so one of the ways that we combat that is to position the fact that ChatGPT is not your only cheat code, right? There
Mm,
are other tools that you are paying for in the library that will help generate that research much faster and much more accurately, and it helps teach you the learning process as well. So we have tools embedded within our systems, and they have the advantage of also being a little bit more transparent because they're showing you these are the steps we're taking to search for these tools. And a lot of the newer AI academic search engines, they're revealing the sort of Boolean logic behind how they're generating the answers and the relevancy of those answers. Now, there's still some black box stuff going on, but we're seeing a lot more pressure on these companies to be more transparent, at least on the academic side. So all of the tools that we would have access to, or the tools that are sort of positioning themselves as these academic search engines, they are at least trying to make efforts at being more transparent, and so that their results are repeatable and that you understand what's going into those result sets.
So, just as a follow up, are those tools more ethical to use? For instance, one of the things that seems to be happening is knowledge is becoming divorced from the source context, right? So, are these going to be a little more ethical in the way that you use them?
Well, so it depends. So, right, what do you mean by ethical? We have large companies, academic publishing companies. So Clarivate is one, Elsevier is one. They're coming out with their own academic research assistants and models. They are using their proprietary data to train the data on. So yes, the data that it's training on is the content that they own and that they license and that they have access to, and presumably have paid someone,
Right.
but most of the time
Well,
they don't pay anybody. That research is generated by faculty for free, which university
right. So
libraries
that's unethical
pay
too. I
for.
get
Thank you
that.
for saying that out loud.
I
Right.
get
We
that.
are
I get
paying
that
for
too.
that. But at
Yeah.
least there's a measure of trust in that,
Right.
right? That we have gone through the steps, that these are licensed materials, and that there's a presumption that the content that it generates and the search results that you're getting are going to be quality resources, verifiable resources. And so there's a really more maybe a better ethical feeling about
Right.
it than
Right.
just
Yeah, it's more valid. They're valid sources, but they're still unethically harvested from the slave level work of academics.
yeah.
Right?
Again, I
Well,
think if you dig deep enough into any system, there's a lot of core.
well, that's true. That's true. I mean, yeah, right.
Well, that kind of leads us into the question of like ChatGPT or just AI infiltrating into like scientific publications, right?
Hmm.
And that's what we were talking about. And some papers have actually listed ChatGPT as a co-author. I had a few students who listed ChatGPT as reference or like as co-authors for one of their projects that they've done. And I didn't know what to think it about it back then, because I mean, yes, they used help and they were honest about it. So I was like, that's fine. But where do you like what's the stand that you take on this?
It's something that I'm interested in. I'm glad that there's a sort of acknowledgement that yes, I did use ChatGPT, and I think we're all kind of figuring out what's the rules, what's the limits, what's the ethical.
Yeah.
What I love the study that was done not too long ago, which it was a librarian who kind of looked at dimensions and this big aggregator of academic research articles to find the number of words that have increased sharply after the rise of ChatGPT and these large language models, like delve and meticulously. And what concerns me is that, maybe there is the research that's being done is original research, that the quality is great. They've done the right methodologies, but it's just the language starts to sound the same because they're all kind of writing the same, and you get a sort of a dullness to it. Personally, look, academic research papers are not riveting novels to read anyway. But when you start to sort of blend together, it becomes very boring and almost ritualistic. And then, of course, that leads to a concern that is there trust issues with this, right? So if you're farming out just your language, what else are you farming out?
Right.
And I think that creates, a different level of mistrust than what we see normally. I mean, there's still a level of critical analysis that you have to do in just any peer-reviewed paper. Is it reproducible, which is a big problem in academic literature now. There's not enough reproducibility studies. The sheer volume of content can become overwhelming. You have the issue of predatory publishing as well. So quality has been an issue for a while. This is just another factor to consider.
Yeah, those studies that you talk about, I think they use the phrase text homogenization. And essentially that it creates this weird hermeneutic effect where you use ChatGPT to help write your paper, and then the grad students who are coming up read those papers, and ultimately they learn that's how you write a paper using that language, and before long they replicate it. And the problem with that is if any of it's misleading or a little bit off, or it sort of homogenizes the text, it scales up the problems that AI introduces into the research process. Right. So it becomes scalable almost immediately.
Yeah, and if you're getting Google Scholar to scrape everything, you put it in an institutional repository, then you get the Matthew effect sometimes of if a publication has enough citations coming off of it, enough people have cited it, it rises to the top. And so if it's open source, if it fits all these criteria, if it's around this particular topic and it has these particular words, it then becomes at the top of your search results, which means other researchers will cite it more and more and more. So
it's almost like a garbage in, garbage out kind of a situation.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's the danger, I guess, of like feedback loops, and like hallucinated research kind of hallucinates itself, and then it's like a endless loop of hallucinations, right?
Right.
So where would you think like librarians can help validate this kind of research? Because like even peer review is compromised as well, right? So.
Yeah, and I know, and I don't know if librarians in general are the answer. I know that we have tools at our disposal to help educate faculty on, the citation metrics. What do they mean? What are their pitfalls? How do you tell when research, is sort of on its own and isolated versus research that's being talked about, and that there's a conversation, right? So are there arguments against the research? Are there replication studies of the research? How is this research being co-developed in other fields? And there actually are a lot of great AI tools that are coming out to show you those connections, to help talk about the behind the scenes that's going on between these scholarly conversations. So like Cite AI is one of them, and it basically will give you a measure of like, here are the other papers of your paper that is arguing against it, or is replicating it, or just mentions it. So it's kind of showing you the thread of the scholarly communication about this issue in relationship to these authors and these papers, right? So it visualizes it in a way that I think nothing else is really doing right now. Consensus is another one that can tell you, okay, you ask it a question, what is the effect of barbiturates on a population of college students in this given category? And it can tell you, well, here's, most papers say this, other papers say no, right? Yes or no. Like, what is the consensus of scientific literature on there? So there's a lot of
Right.
tools that are developed out there, and librarians can help with that, but also just kind of just talking in general about the overall nature of research. We have a lot of librarians out there, not me, who do a lot of studies on bibliometrics and how does scholarly research kind of move through the pipeline, and what are the changes that we're seeing. How do we know what we know? And so there's a lot of that discussion happening at other institutions.
Right. And that's really interesting that, yeah, that's really interesting, the way you kind of framed it. It's yeah, it's just that we really need that thing, not just here, but like, everywhere around the world, where like librarians as the guardians of information, or like the guardians of the library, which has always been the central point of any educational institution that there is. Like, this is their time to kind of speak up and stand up against, all of these things that are being done, or, the way AI is being used, or information is being used in AI.
And I don't know
Right.
if I really like the term guardians. I feel like that kind of involves that we're gatekeeping. I feel like we're more just kind of shepherds. Like, we're like,
Right.
hey, this is where you might want to go, and this is,
Right.
you might want to be careful of this. We're all about, like, let's open the gates, let's let people in, but understand the benefits and the risks and the pitfalls, right?
Well,
Absolutely.
I have a quick question, just as a tangent, and we don't have to spend much time on it. But did you mention to me that some of the large-scale publishing companies, like what is it, Taylor and
I think
Francis
so,
and
yeah.
Elsevier, that what they're doing now is they're now treating it as a revenue stream to sell access to their open source
Yeah.
material to train LLMs?
Yeah.
So
Really. Wow.
yeah, so that's I don't know. Can we speak to that? I
Well,
just think that's an interesting thing to talk
it
about.
shouldn't be surprising. I think one of the, you mentioned the hallucinations being a problem, and part of that is the sycophantic nature of ChatGPT is always wanting to please you and always wanting to, confirm what you want.
Mm,
And so
right,
it doesn't have access to the premium content, right? It gets paywalled, it hits that barrier. And so frequently the resources that it tries to give you are open source. And I've seen this over and over again. Like it has access to the abstracts of things too. So that's the other data pool that it draws from. And it doesn't have access to the full text, and you really need that as your premium data. So I think it's interesting that they're actually making deals, because I guess what academic publications have started to realize is that if we don't do these deals, we'll get no money because they'll just take it, right?
right,
They'll find a way to scrape it off Sci-Hub or LibGen. So we might as well try
or
to
Anna's archive and some of
try
the
to
other places.
generate
Yeah.
revenue from it.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So, like, it's crazy. Like, people really don't stop to think about all of these, these avenues or these nitty gritties of things. But when you kind of lay it out in front of them, I hope they start understanding, the source of data, and how these models have gotten data. And I'm glad you're bringing up all of these conversations, or all of these topics. That leads us to confabulation. Sean, do you want to take over confabulation?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about it, mostly because we're going to put a full list of our sources. I
Yes.
think just in the text on we're hosting on YouTube. We're putting it on YouTube, so we'll just put because there's a lot from today. But in general, one way to think about this is that hallucinations really arise from how the LLM generates responses by predicting the next word based on probabilities. It's not really fact checking, it never fact checks. It just says what is the most likely, reasonable, and logically structured word that would fall in next. And so, as you mentioned, what is it, Mehmet Ozer essentially says that confabulation is probably the better term for this. And people do confabulate, just for the record. And this happens a lot. I've seen it happen even to me, where someone tells a story as if it personally happened to them, they personally experienced the event, but it's really someone else's story that they're recalling. They're confabulating it. Really, all that is it's the brain filling in gaps during memory reconstruction. So if the story is relatable and it makes sense, it can even be complete fiction, and they can relate it as if it's absolutely true, but it's based on partial memories and in ways that people can kind of gap fill in the way they think about the world. So this gets back to our sort of analogy we talked about in the what is quickly becoming the Lost podcast episode, which is way substandard, which was one, where we talked about people think probabilistically. And so the AI is doing it based on probabilities. And so let's say it's over 50%. It assumes it has the correct information. It builds a story around that correct information that's plausibly true. Does that kind of get at it? It's like that old joke, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
That's true. And also, like, don't humans, isn't the Mandela effect something like this? Or is it something different?
There are several effects like it, but yeah, I mean, where you essentially, your brain will act in such a way to fill in gaps in information or fill in gaps in perception. I don't think AI is doing it exactly the same way, but it is, and that's sort of the argument, is that it is confabulating. I think hallucination, once again, is probably the better word just because it's globally accepted, but it is predicting based on the limited information that it has. And once again, as Angela pointed out, it tries to please you. So that's why it gives you the story. It's trying to make you happy by saying, oh yeah, well that's absolutely true. That's why when you tell it, hey, what's that in the corner of the room? And it'll say, I can't see it. And you keep saying it, it will start to describe something in the corner of the room. And it was doing this yesterday with me where I was using a document. It was actually in Arkansas law, and I was trying to break it apart to see what its elements were. And it kept telling me, well, yes, that's on page 76. And there was no page 76 to the document. It just kept telling me, and it made up sections and all that. It was doing it in real time. It was actually kind of fun. So it's really trying to please you. I don't know. I mean, you're the AI guy. But does that sound like an adequate description?
It actually is. I mean, you'd be amazed at the amount of pleasing that it actually tries to do to its user. It's like, it's not model specific. Like every LLM model actually goes through this at this point. And again, like it's been said, it's trying to please you. It almost makes me think, and I did do some reading on it, but I really didn't go too deep in it. So when you're typing out text, there's this central text probability generator that it gives you, right? So when you write, for example, I, it's going to say, okay, so the next word that it predicts is wood, right? And so if you keep hitting your central probability generator in your text while you're texting, maybe that can be an example of hallucination as well, because it starts to hallucinate things and it tries to complete sentences based off of some past information, right? That's some very basic form of AI as well. And you can see, like, how those hallucinations occur in real time in your text as well, right? It doesn't always have to be like an extra LLM out there, which is kind of crazy. Again, I'm sorry I went off on a tangent there, but coming back to Angela, sorry. Again, like I said, this is the first time we're doing it, so we kind of...
I think this is a great discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
So coming back to my question for you, so should we be teaching the why behind AI output for our students and for like any user out there, and not just the what?
Yes. I mean, I think if you can find a way to fit that in, and it's going to look different. I think when you're talking about students, they're not a monolith, right? So talking to a freshman is going to be a very different conversation than talking to a senior. And in different fields that will change as well. I think for when I talk to students, a lot of times I'm in either the freshman level comp, 1, or I might be in a junior, senior level, research project class. So when I'm talking to freshmen, I probably would not go into that much detail. It may be much more limited to just, hey, this is how it works and this is what it can do. And these are some pitfalls that you might find into. I think when you're talking about confabulation, hallucination, whatever, I read a study recently that they were talking to, I think think they had a sample of like 200 students, lots of different disciplines, lots of different, first year, second year, third year. And more than half did not know that AI hallucinated. Like, that just did not know. And I think that your freshmen are probably going to be largely in that category. Like, just being able to trust it without question. And if you think about it, if you're a student, you're a freshman, you just got out of high school, you're just trying to get work done in a hurry, you're probably not going to care that much. You just want that end product done. You're not thinking about it too much. You're not criticizing, you're not questioning whether it's right or wrong. It is very end product oriented, right? I just want to turn in the thing. I want to finish the project and get the treat, right? I want to get my A. That's it. And then the students develop, and as they move along, they're changing sometimes things, right? They still have the same time pressure, but they're going to be a little bit more critical. And I think that's when you can really do deep dives into, here's why it's doing that, right? Here's how it's doing that, to the extent that we know, right? Because there's still there's some elements that, even the people who are making these things don't really know. I think one thing to also clarify is, hallucination is not the only thing that AI contributes in the realm of misinformation. There's also just misinformation, just out and out, like, it's not as updated, right? And especially the free models, they're not going to be as updated. The free models hallucinate more. Like, they're the ones that are going to generate the faker citations more frequently than the newer premium paid models. So there's that issue of equity. There's also just omission, right? You ask it to summarize a paper, and it may leave out whole parts of it. It may divorce from context certain key features, right? It can take an academic paper that has concluded one thing, and the summary will conclude the opposite. And so we've seen that happen too. So I think it's more than just confabulation. I think there's a whole range of issues. And one of the ways that I've seen other librarians talk about combating this is to teach prompt engineering, right? To teach the students how to generate a prompt that minimizes that risk, or to use systems that are more closed, like Notebook LM, or systems that are going to just focus on one particular paper, like some of our academic search engines do.
No, I think that's good, and I think one of the things as sort of underpinning what you're saying is that these things don't know facts, right? Once again, they're guessing based on patterns that they've seen before. One thing to keep in mind as well when they hallucinate or when they confabulate is that they tend to do that more. They're more prone to do that when the prompt is vague, or it's a narrative task, or it's persuasive writing. Right, so the whole thing is it's going to drift from whatever the factual basis is. So students need to be aware of that, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about. That they need to be skeptical.
Well, and they
in
need
anything
to
they
care.
do. And care.
And that's the concern that I have the most. Is that we're living in a world where their news sources come from TikTok. And so you talk about divorce from context, right? So they are getting factual sources filtered through, the lens of someone who's not a professional, not a journalist, just another kid like them who they trust more because the delivery is more entertaining and more interesting. And there's always their own personal, like, I'm going to give you my theory and my synopsis and my, it's always through that lens. Right. And so they're kind of constantly in a world where information's coming at them from a fire hose, and they're selectively choosing sort of their way of filtering that out. And their sort of answer to, well, don't you care that it's true or not, is, maybe like, well, I accept the fact that the information that I'm receiving is probably not true or accurate, but it is entertaining.
Yeah. But they choose to believe it as well, right?
And so getting them to actually care about reality, objective truth, and to understand that there is a way to do it, and care enough to try, because reality and understanding factual reality takes hard work. It's critical thinking. It's understanding nuance. It's not listening to your own biases or the biases of others. It's trying, and that is the part of learning. It's that process part that isn't as always sexy or interesting or fun or entertaining that I think is a big barrier to learning. So
Right.
getting them to
But
understand
also,
that is important.
like, could you blame them because there's so much misinformation
Yeah.
going around everywhere, and
Right.
so many people are falling for it, like face first. But when their children are falling for misinformation from TikTok, they're the ones who are kind of telling them that how could you believe that off of TikTok, whereas they themselves are believing things that their friends are sharing on Facebook.
Yes.
Right. Well, and
Right.
then
So
part of this is it's part of a broader pattern that we're seeing now, and this is the influence of technology that goes back to the advent of the internet, where the internet effectively created this opportunity where everything becomes talk radio and everything becomes an opinion, and it kind of levelizes truth, right? So you
right.
can trace this back. There's some people who refer to this as the cult of the amateur, where what you have is you have people who suddenly your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving is as valid as the CNN reporter. And when that happens, it creates fertile ground upon which everybody just assumes that everybody has an agenda and nobody follows the method, and it's all opinion anyway. My concern is that AI sort of makes that scalable. Once again, it
Yeah.
just
So that's all the
it,
more reason that we as educators have to push back on that and have to
right.
really start implementing plans to teach information literacy, AI literacy, not only at our level but much earlier. And I think there's a recent law that just got passed in Arkansas to help put digital literacy in K through 12 education. So I'm very
Yep.
excited about that. I would like us to
Yeah.
kind of move to what Finland does, right? Which is to implement information literacy and help educate children as young as kindergartners. And it
Yeah.
carries all the way through till high school. How to spot misinformation, how to spot propaganda, how to spot advertisement, right? They're trained from that early age because for them it's a national security priority.
Right.
Right.
I'd love to see
I think
that
it should
happen
be
here.
here.
Which is amazing. Yeah, it should be
Yeah.
everywhere at this point. It's funny you brought up that thing about the free models hallucinating more than the paid ones. So I don't know if you watched but there's this series called Black Mirror on Netflix.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you haven't watched the episode, so they just dropped a season. So if you haven't watched
Okay.
Common People,
I need to.
watch Common People. Like that's if that's an alarm for everything that's going on right now, like please take it as one. If that's not. So moving on. Now, if information has been repeated enough number of times, or like you were saying, AI kind of adds to the misinformation, and ends up hallucinating. It ends up repeating it over and over again. So, what happens when this starts becoming the truth, or it becomes accepted as the truth?
When we lose wisdom, I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I think that's a sort of a scenario that is existential. And I think it's
Well,
already
it's
happening in some cases. I mean, and depending on the person that you're talking to and the people that you're talking to, there's concern right now that systems and sources of data that we once relied upon and trusted are now disappearing or perhaps are becoming corrupted.
So, how do you think
well,
we can stop that misinformation?
I, Good question.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to teaching children and teaching our young people and teaching ourselves all of the steps to think critically and to do all of the steps that we were trained to do as educators and researchers, to look at different sources, to find the sources that we trust, modeling that behavior to others, even if it sacrifices time, right? We're so very much interested in efficiency, but knowing truth and wisdom is expensive and time consuming.
Right.
And that
well, I
goes
think
back
that's
to
what.
the information has value principle. Like, we have to invest our time and our resources into finding factual, truthful information and modeling behavior that helps young people find those resources and think critically about what they're reading. You know?
Right, and I think it's an epistemological question, like you point out. And didn't you said something to me that really stuck? It was something like information is now cheap, but truth
It's
is valuable
expensive. Yes.
or is expensive.
I talk to that.
Which is
Yeah.
which is what you were talking about. And I think that's what you have to return to those principles that have driven essentially the most successful epistemological framework, which is science. You have to return to those principles, which is knowledge is created through validated methods that ensure replicability, and at the same time, it is vetted through a process of peer review. I mean, you have to get back to those core principles. Your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving is not the same as somebody who spent decades studying cancer. Those are not equivalent, and that's where I think we push back is on the epistemological front.
And to
What do
somehow
you think?
make it more attractive, to students and young people. Right now, they're being fed a diet of outrage, right?
Right.
The algorithms that they're looking at every day, right? This is training them to have less attention span, so they're less likely to spend the time because their time is precious. The commodity now is their attention. It's our attention. And so if their attention is shorter, and we know that their limbic brain, their snake brain, is sort of being activated all the time by outrage machines,
Social media.
that's what's driving sort of this misinformation feeding frenzy, right? It's what is making you angry, what is making you just because that's what you're going to watch, right? That's what you're paying attention to, or you're just deciding to disengage from it all, right? That's the other part, and be passive and just be apathetic and say this postmodern world there's no such thing as truth. I'm going to look at cat pictures all day.
Well, you're pointing to, not to drift, but you're pointing to something very key, and I see it in students. And it's a kind of passivity that just tell me what I'm supposed to do. And that is underpinning in some of these issues and very, very dangerous, I think, to the process of creating knowledge. Education and knowledge creation is a contact sport. And you're not supposed to necessarily agree all the time. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to argue the ideas out, right? And I think when we rely on something like AI as giving us the definitive answer, when in fact it is incapable of doing that, that's the dystopian sort of AI nightmare that I if I have to put money on something, that's the one that I see coming, and whoever controls the AI. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. I'm just drifting.
Oh. AI controls AI at this point.
Right.
Or A1 controls AI at this point.
That's right.
Time for a sponsor break.
A1. It's good for the kids.
Yeah.
Right.
For educational purposes only. That's what they did on Instagram. That was replaced with for educational purposes
Really?
only. They had a great
Stuff on
response.
everything.
It's fun.
So, I think in general, then doesn't that bring us to, and this is why I mentioned epistemology. Librarians are actually trying to do some of that work, right? I mean, that's sort of the defenders of credibility.
We're trying.
Agreed.
I mean, I don't know if I appreciate your enthusiasm for our work. I don't know if we're necessarily at the held in that regard by most of society. We like to think of ourselves as, but we definitely are working towards that. And I think what it takes, though, is it takes everybody, right? We can help, generate, curricular requirements and programs, and we have frameworks for information literacy that we've adopted for years, and we go out and we go to the classrooms and we sing our song and dance about why this is important. But at the end of the day, if we don't have faculty support and reinforcement of that in the classrooms and in other areas, then we're kind of screaming in the void, right? So I think it takes faculty to engage with us and with these principles and to continue that forward and talk about it, because the students want to talk about it. That's what's interesting to me, is when I go to the classroom and I'm talking about sources of information, they're asking me, what about ChatGPT? Can I use that as a valid, trusted source of information? They want to have that discussion, and we'll you can see as soon as I mention it, everybody leans in, right? They want to know. And
Yeah.
so I don't think enough conversation is happening, about AI in general has a source of information, and using that in research and using that in writing. And I know some classes will emphasize that more than others. So to have a broader conversation, especially at the foundational level, I think that would be a really good idea. And I've got ideas on how to implement that, but I think just starting the conversation and getting us to where we're acknowledging that this is a real need is important.
Well, in some respects, you guys are a little bit ahead, I think, of faculty. I mean, that's one of the things Bhaskar and I discovered, even going to Florida, is faculty's just kind of caught in this deer in the headlights moment where it's like, oh yeah, AI, and our response is to restrict it, when in fact the cultural impetus and the normative structure, et cetera, is moving toward using it. So the question is, what do you do? So now you guys have a toolkit or something like that you've been developing as librarians, right? You went to that conference?
So first of all, there's librarians all over this country who are developing curriculum, toolkits, resource guides. I mean, it's everywhere. And yeah, every conference I go to now is 90% of it's AI. Like it's talking about what we're doing in the classrooms, what we're doing within our systems. So using these models to help, with our budgeting and acquisitions and our collection development. But in terms of guides, so right now my main group, the American Association of College and Research Librarians, are using they're developing an AI skill competency framework. So just generalizing skills and competencies librarians should have regarding AI tools. So that's in terms of a national organization doing something, right? Other individual librarians and other agencies are developing curricular frameworks for teaching AI literacy. I know the Department of Ed had one for a while, if it still exists. So these frameworks are certainly being developed in lots of places, and it's not just in librarians; it's in education especially. But it's certainly a big source of topic with us. I know that our own librarian, Sherry Tinarella, she's working on a syllabus for a course in AI literacy. I know this is something that we were trying to get off the ground, so we're still pushing for that. I know we've talked about maybe introducing some kind of foundations of research methods or some kind of AI literacy in Tech 1001. So we're eager to sit at the table and help with that effort, however we can. So we certainly have enough resources and tools at our disposal to do this.
Absolutely, and we appreciate that, and you appreciate the effort that you've taken, and that's the whole reason why we kind of started this podcast, was to start that conversation and get more people involved, just so that everybody knows that we're essentially all on the same page, almost on the same page with it. We want to start a conversation and we want to start making changes, but it's just that we really aren't all getting together on this conversation, which is the idea behind this. So thank you so much for your time. I think this was extremely informative. We're really grateful to have you here. You were our first guest. I hope we were good, question askers.
You were excellent.
Okay, great.
Did you have fun?
Yes, so this is a conversation that we're having all over the place. So any chance I get, every conference I'm at, every time I'm talking about other librarians, we're just kind of nerding out on this stuff, and it's both simultaneously exciting and terrifying. And so that's sort of been our mood, and we're just trying to figure it all out too. I will plug my next Tech Talk. So if you come to the Tech Talk series at Tech, I'm doing one on academic research assistants and search engines, the next generation, fueled by AI. So please come, and we'll have another great, interesting, nerdy conversation about search engines. So
yeah, we're doing a Tech Talk too, although we haven't heard back.
Right.
I will say, just as a correction before we wrap up into final takeaways, in I think it was episode 3, I mentioned something about Angela. writing an AI policy for the State
No,
Library
no,
Association.
I'm not.
Turns out I hallucinated that. So,
You
so
did.
just
Welcome to the
just for the
club.
record,
No,
right?
I'm part of the AI task force. When we work with you, we're trying to develop, an ethical policy and some guidelines on that. So I look forward to continuing that work. We've been having some great conversations with other departments. So all of this, is just we're not too far from in talking with other librarians across the country about what's your the institution's policies, and they're at the same place. They're like, we're developing them, but I can tell that librarians are in the room, and that's what's important when we're developing these policies and we're talking about AI ethics. I think it's important that we just be in the room and help contribute to that conversation based on our literature and our professional studies and what's going on with us. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
being in that room.
Oh, absolutely. And we appreciate you being in this conversation as well.
Absolutely.
So for our
Absolutely.
final takeaways, again, like AI hallucinations aren't, or confabulations, they aren't bugs, but it's just a feature in like the prediction model that kind of messes things up a little bit. But I guess that keeps us on at the edge of our seats, right? We just can't
Right.
accept whatever is given to us. We need to learn to ask why, and that's very important. And I feel we're forgetting that. And I appreciate like the unique stand that the librarians take, the intersection of like credibility, ethics, and information design. And for all institutions, you just adopting AI isn't just the way to go, right? You need frameworks, you need ethics. Am I right, Sean? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no. It's like we've discussed. You need more than just saying we're going to use AI. You have to have the rules. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to have everything in place before you just flip the switch.
All right, absolutely. So again,
Then
thank
you
you,
need
everybody.
literacy.
And we
Just
need
for the
literacy,
record.
100%. Yes, we need
AI
to put that in
literacy.
as well. Yes. All right, so that's it for episode 4. Episode 5, are we going to have more guests on, Sean?
Yeah, Jeff Auger has tentatively agreed, so he's at a conference in New Orleans right now.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure he will come on and discuss. I think we call it the lathe of teaching.
Okay.
It's something like that. But he'll talk about online education, which is a big deal.
All right. All right, perfect. So, yep, that's it. If you like our episode, leave us a like, leave us a comment, and we'd appreciate any feedbacks. All right, thank you, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye.